This is a quick video I thought I'd make to run through some of the processes we performed in class. I also thought it'd be useful to make something from scratch when you load up PD. So when you open PD, we just have a blank window. This is not where you can start patching things, but rather it's the console where you can print messages and you can see errors. So you might just want to drag it onto the right hand side so that you can always see it while you're patching it first, and then later on you can hide it behind other stuff and just come back to it when you need it. One of the key things here is you can turn audio on and off with this DSP button here. So let's go to the file menu and we'll make a new file. Now we have a different blank window. This is the patcher where we create our software. And the very first thing I'll do is go to File, Save As, and I'll make myself a folder in my documents. And then I'll give this a name. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to make a sine wave. Okay, now that I've got this file, it's a good idea just to get used to hitting save, so Command S every now and again, just in case it crashes. It's fairly stable these days. So first of all, we'll make a sine wave oscillator. So I'll put an object here from the menu, and now I have a blank object attached to my mouse. I'll type in OSC, and then it's important to have the tilde to make sure that PD knows that this is an audio object. And then I can't hit enter to create the object, but I can click the mouse outside. This is a little bit small, so I've hit Command plus to zoom in. Now straight away I'm going to make a second object which is going to multiply it, and I'm multiplying that by 0.2. So it's 20% of its original volume. And then Command 1 again for all of these. I can create DAC with a tilde, which is digital analog converter. Now you might want to connect your cables straight away as you're making objects, or you might prefer to make your objects and then connect them up. It's up to you. In this case I've made all the objects that I'm going to use, and then I'm connecting, dragging from the top here at the bottom of the oscillator object, so what we call the outlet. You can see there's a little circle appearing on my mouse there, down into the inlet, the left inlet of this multiplier object, and then the same thing into the DAC. And I'm going to duplicate the signal from the oscillator to go to the left and the right channels there. Now I can turn the audio on, and I can hear a click, but I'm not actually getting any sound. Also, probably what I should have done there was turn my sound right down, but let's assume that I was doing that. Okay, so we haven't given the oscillator a frequency. And there are two ways that we can do this. The first one would be to type into the oscillator box a sine tone. So that could be, for example, 440, which I think we agreed was A. Now when I turn it up, turn it down first and then turn it on. There we've got an oscillator running at 440 Hz. But if I want to change that over time, I could also put in, oops, I have to be focused on the PD window. or the patcher window even, I can put in a number box. As soon as I send a number to the oscillator, this 440 is not going to mean anything, but if I close PD, then it'll open up with that value as default. So let's listen. It's not at 0 Hz now, because I haven't actually sent a number from this. To change the number, I'm leaving edit mode, so Command E. And you'll notice that the mouse is now a pointer rather than the finger. So this is how we tell that we're in edit mode. Edit mode, oops, edit mode. Okay, so it's sometimes not clear, but edit mode, you should often see that the mouse is turning into a finger. And in what we'll call performance mode for now, it's going to turn into an arrow. And also when I run my mouse over this number box, it turns into a kind of upwards arrow, which indicates that I could move it up. So I'm clicking and dragging on this number box. And just to demonstrate what I was talking about earlier, I'll save this and then I'll close it. And for my recent files, I'm going to open the same file. And that's gone back to the default 440. And this number box has been cleared. Let's turn the sound off for a moment. So what if I want a more predictable way of changing these numbers? I've got another kind of object that I can put in called a message. The messages are being sent between these objects all the time. So if we have this thin cable coming out of the number box, that's what we call a control message. And then we have audio on these thick cables here. Let's just zoom out. This is, I think, possibly new for this most recent version of Pure Data. So the audio cables are just that little bit thicker. The message box sends out a fixed message, so we can predetermine it and we could use it as a kind of keyboard. Let's try that. So I'll have one as 440 and I'll have a second message as twice that, so 880. Again, I'll click and drag from the message into the number box and we can have multiple messages coming in. It won't respond until we've actually clicked on these. Now, if I'm in edit mode, clicking on these gives me an opportunity to edit them, like so. I need to come out of edit mode and come into what we're calling performance mode. So I'll go here, I could press Command E as well. And now, if I click, I'll just turn our audio back on. So the oscillator was already at 440. Now we can switch between them. Well, that's all well and good, but if we try playing with different frequencies, we're expecting equal temperament so that we can play with our piano playing friend. We're going to have to get used to dragging these number boxes around and kind of becoming theremin players. we don't necessarily have time to do that. So another way of generating the frequencies for these sine waves would be using another object called MTOF. I'll just move this out of the way. MTOF stands for MIDI to frequency. Let's put one of those in. Dragging from the bottom, the outlet, into the inlet. And again, you can see these cables are thin and these cables are thick. So up until this point, we're working, here, we're working in messages, and down here we're working in the audio. MTOF will convert numbers from 0 to 127 into what we call MIDI notes, and you can find a chart in the lecture materials. It's also fairly easy to work these out, so I'll put a number box here at the top, and then I'll come out of edit mode, go to DSP, turn the audio back on. So MTOF is converting these into frequencies, and does a lot of that hard work for us, so we don't need to become virtual theremin players. Just tidying up a little bit here. So we could also type notes in by clicking and going 62, 64, 67, 69 and 72. So we've made a pentatonic scale, major pentatonic. So I'm just clicking on the number box and typing different numbers in, pressing enter, and I can also drag the mouse. But as we saw before, we could also put these messages in so that we don't have to constantly be re-entering the data. And again, this will indicate how in the future, if we had a MIDI controller, some sort of keyboard, we could control this in different ways. So I'll put in a message here, starting with 60. Again, this control rate message. Instantly, I'm clicking on these cables, and if we want to remove a cable, we can delete it just like we would other things. Okay, so I'm going to put that scale in. Oops, 62. And I'm feeling lazy, so I'm going to highlight these and press Command D. And this is a new trick. This has just come in the new version of PD. So if I had all of these objects highlighted and I drag one of them down into the number box to connect the cable, then all the cables will be connected. So let's just do that again. I'm going to delete all these. I'm going to select all of these objects that I created, drag the cable from one of them, and they all get plugged in. Amazing. 67, 69 and 72. might vary, but that works quite nicely. Let's say I wanted that note to be a little bit flat. I wanted to get a little bit microtonal. I could edit this and I could say 63.5, so we can go between the notes. We're not restricted here with which frequencies we can put in, so why should we be restricted up here? A little bit gamelan feel there. Finally, we could duplicate the whole thing and start thinking about processing in slightly different ways, so we could transpose so that we get some interesting harmonies. So I could just drag over this whole thing and press Command D. It's a really good idea to turn your audio off if you're going to do something like that, or just mute your speakers, just in case. Now you can see why it was useful that I had that 0.2 here, because that meant immediately there was space for me to have these two oscillators going at once. If they were both at full volume, then immediately we get a bit of distortion. So that's kind of fun. Now, what if I wanted to, since we were playing with that little gamelan connection just now, and if you haven't heard of gamelan, go and check it out. It's Indonesian tuned percussion. Sometimes we might tune our gamelan instruments slightly out so that we have a beating sound. Actually, I'll demonstrate that with two frequencies going at once on these two oscillators. So I'll bring these together. Anybody who plays guitar will probably be familiar with the sensation of finding the kind of wavering as you're tuning. Now let's say we like this relationship and we want to transpose it so that each of these notes that we play, not just the A, will be creating this kind of wavering beating tone. Well, go back to edit. I've probably got into the habit of pressing Command E to go back and forth between edit mode and what we're calling performance mode. Yeah, there are a couple of different ways we could do this. So I'm going to click on this cable. And here I'm just going to add 0.2 to that 60. Or whichever number is going to come through here. It's not just 60, but this is the number box that we have. Okay. Let's put another number box. Again, I'm switching into commands, key commands, rather than using the menu. So that would have been the number box here, Command 3. Hopefully you're recognizing these by shape fairly quickly as well. Okay, there we go. Nice. That works really well. And so I kind of like a way for this to happen automatically though. I'd like to click on these boxes at the top and have both of these play at the same time. So we start getting into the realms of connecting stuff into other stuff and seeing what happens. Switching into edit mode. I'm just going to delete these message boxes. I don't need them for now. Well, I could connect these And one way of doing this, don't copy this, but I could connect all of these into here. And actually, now that we're running this new version of PD, I could highlight these and they could all go in, and then we get a lovely spider's web, which looks nice, but is going to be a real pain to work with if we just want to change one or two things. So is that the best place that I could use to connect these? Probably not. So I'm going to go through and delete all those cables. Now, I have a feeling it might be here. So when I change this number box, I move down here, I can see that everything is being changed below that point, which is essentially the whole thing. Now when I play, great. That seems to work quite nicely, and so I could access it with these number boxes up here, or these message boxes even, or I could just play the whole thing from up here. Let's tidy it up. Let's just get rid of these. We don't need them on the screen. And I know that I can copy and paste all of that again if I need to. So I'll delete that. I'll bring this in. And now I'm really going to start playing around. So one thing I could do, if you've got headphones plugged in, and this might work on your speakers as well, is I'm going to delete the right speaker from my first instrument, because that's what it's starting to feel like, and I'm going to delete the left speaker connection from this other one. You might find yourself doing this by accident quite a lot as well if you forget to connect both of the DACs. So it's worth thinking about doing this deliberately. Yeah, so on my laptop speakers already, we've got quite an interesting tone going on. The beating is less prominent actually, because it's not coming out of the same speaker. Now there are ways that we could pan this, that we could deliberately move it between the speakers, but for now I think that works quite nicely. Let's use that same process with the plus object to transpose something up a whole octave as well. So I'll take all of this and duplicate. And now I'm going to put in a plus box, and because we're working with MIDI notes, I can say plus 12, knowing that that's going to be an octave. And stuff gets a bit unwieldy from time to time. Remember, we're zoomed in, so this is more likely what you'd be looking at on your screen, but it's quite good to stay at this level of simplicity if you're just starting out. So let's delete all of these, we don't need these, and we'll go plus 12. I can't help but see these as eyes and beaks now, after our little PD sculpture thing. Switching back into performance mode. So my 60 is controlling this oscillator here, it's being converted into a frequency. It's also coming down here and being turned into a kind of beating thing, because we're just adding a tiny change to that pitch, which is then being represented by this frequency here. Oop, accidentally fine-tuning that, but that'll be fine because I can just reset it. Okay, and then over here we're adding a whole octave to that. So 60 becomes 72, which you can see is the upper range of our pentatonic scale up here. And everything's being multiplied by 0.2, which means we're at 80% of the total volume that we could have before it starts getting distorted. So that's good, we like that. Let's turn the sound back on. And of course we've got the whole beating thing going on here as well. So it's actually, it feels like not necessarily a complex sound, but quite a rich sound already, because everything is linked directly in at an octave. Instead of necessarily thinking of that as harmony on two separate instruments, it feels like we've got one big tone, and we can play with that. So if we say 12.1 instead of 12, note that nothing changed in the sound then, because I didn't actually send any messages. And again, it's just worth thinking, where am I? Am I in the control world or am I in the audio world? Well, I'm in the control world here, because all these cables are thin, up until the point when I get to this oscillator. Then we get into audio. So any changes here will not happen automatically. I'm going to have to tell them to happen. And I appreciate that I'm getting maybe a little too deep here to start off with, but let's see. So I need to then send a message, and then we'll hear this for the first time. Okay, well I'm not hearing anything really. If I say 12.4, again nothing's changed until I send this message up here. That's quite subtle. What if I go for 12.7? It's interesting, this starts breaking the sound back down a little bit so we can hear the individual components. And actually what I feel there is kind of like a flute sound maybe. So hopefully that gives you an idea of where we could go with starting to synthesize tones and starting to synthesize actually quite complex stuff with not that much going on. Half of the space that I've used up here, I think pretty much, is all these number boxes which I've kept in to show you what's going on. If we were to take these out, then the patch would actually look quite small, quite compact. It's also worth thinking of these as units, so breaking down the space on the screen and knowing which each discrete unit would be. And in future weeks we can start looking at making what we call a sub-patcher, so that we could put all of this into its own little box with an inlet and an outlet, and things start getting bigger and more complex. For the time being, just have a play around with this, see what you can get out of it, maybe go back to the start of this video and work up until your comfort zone, you know, and that might just be that. Play around with that, make some music with it. You could even just record straight onto your phone. Think of this as a sound source, don't think of this as something that lives in the computer. It's not really at the stage where we can jam with other people necessarily, unless you feel like doing some drone. But the next step, I suppose, for that would be getting some volume control in, so we could trigger an envelope and actually start feeling the shape of notes that die out But I think that's going to do everything we want just for our first stages. Thanks for watching. I hope this has been useful, and look forward to seeing what we can do in the future.